we're going to do, we worked it out amongst us. I'm more the theory guy. Then we're going to go into application, both in the public sector and the private sector. But there's some basics we got to get through. And they asked Jesse James, they said, why did you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. Well, really in measurement and all this stuff we're doing, the heart of the issue is around accountability. My basic thesis is that accountability precedes compelling measurement. So that's why I wanted to focus on accountability, and I found over the years, giving lectures at universities and conferences, that believe it or not, accountability is not that well understood. So we're going to go through some basics, and then I'm going to show how that these basics are applied. Now, so what we're going to do is the argument. The basic argument, the take-home message is without compelling, the reporting without compelling accountability has limited effect, i.e. it's largely a waste of time. We need to talk about what accountability is and why it's a necessary condition. It's the necessary and sufficient condition thing. We'll go through quickly the principles of accountability, and then we'll talk how it's applied to corporate and government accountability. And we go through the ABCs of compelling accountability, and then we're going to talk just what's missing from corporate and government reporting. So this will give you a framework to look at some of the other things that the other presenters will cover. So, the argument that I'm going to present is that if reports, all these reports that we do, all these gazillions, what we got here is an environmental accounting zoo that we've all helped to create. And if all these reports that we're doing, like the Kessie one, if they don't inform an accountability relationship, they don't do much. Because they're not going to change behavior. And as we know as a species, that if we don't change our behavior, we're in trouble. Now in the corporate sector, the problem, and Valerie's going to talk about this, is each one reports as if they were the only enterprise in the universe. So for what we geographers call, the scale thing is wrong and there's no context. So they report out of context and it's useless. It's largely useless, and it's based on this voluntary accountability concept. Voluntary accountability is an oxymoron, like Central Intelligence Agency. It doesn't compute. The public sector, now they go the other way. They report all context, all the big picture, but you don't have a clue for what each level of government is accountable. So that's the argument. We'll go through that. Now, why is accountability a necessary and sufficient condition? This is what I learned in my geography degree, is in a car, you've got an engine. That's a necessary condition to get from A to B. But it's not enough. You need little things like a driver, you need gas. Okay? But without that engine, you're not going anywhere. So that's why accountability, we say it's a necessary condition. Now, what is accountability? People just, I've been in this business for 30 years, and it just amazes me that academics, nobody understands what it is. Yet we love the blame game. That's every day, pretty soon, in a couple of days, we're going to start with question period. It's all in the blame game, and then when something goes wrong, like Toyota, the whole accountability thing comes up again. What is it? It's based on an accountability relationship. Accountability relationship, people say, what is the most widely used 3 words in the English language? Is it I love you, you love me? No, it's you owe me. That's what human business is based on. You owe me. That's an accountability relationship. We all get into contracts, okay? Authority is conferred and responsibility is assigned. So authority at the government level is assigned to a government, to a cabinet. Then we have a ministerial system here. Ministerial responsibility, it's assigned to a minister. The minister has to justify her or his actions to Parliament. In the case of Toyota, even Mr. Toyota, the grandson of the founder, has to justify his action to the shareholders. That authority has been conferred to him. They have to justify his actions. And the higher authority must hold people to account. So the board has to hold him to account. Parliament has to hold the government to account. And the rendering of account is mandatory. It carries consequence. So Mr. Toyota, when he's asked to attend the congressional committee last week, doesn't say, oh, I don't think it fits in my schedule. No, he has to show up. It carries huge consequences. When a minister is asked to render an account of what she or he did, for example, in the blood scandal, which in the tainted blood, she has to come. She can be subpoenaed. So this is nothing voluntary. So this is why I say voluntary accountability is an oxymoron. There's absolutely nothing voluntary about this. So those are the basic principles. That's all there is to it. Now there's a cycle. We hear modern management, MBAs, it's all based on the concept of stewardship. Stewards, back in medieval times, the Lord wants to go on a crusade, whatever, he flips the keys to the steward and says, I'm off for 4 years. When I come back from the Holy Lands, tell me what you did with the estates. Render me an account. Render me an account. So the steward then has to render an account, and there'll be a holding account. The Lord holds him to account. It's just basic stewardship. And there's an accountability relationship. So there's a cycle. There's a cycle in the private sector. There's a cycle in the government sector. The annual reports, when they come out, they affect the shareholders, it affects stock markets. There's accountability and there's a compelling consequence. So under financial statements, bad numbers, people lose their jobs, companies go out of business. There's a consequence. We got a new budget coming up here in Canada. The deficit numbers, there is a bottom line in government. And there will be accountability for whether they meet their targets. Now, let's look at the private sector. For what are corporations accountable? Not this fuzzy voluntary stuff, the real accountability. They are accountable for profit. Okay, that's clear cut. And they are accountable to, the stuff in red is real. This is compelling accountability with consequence. So, any corporation, they are accountable to regulators for health, safety, and the environment. That's what corporations are accountable for. That is the law. They are accountable to the tax authorities. Every corporation, large, small, we all have partners. Yeah, we have partners. These are in red, the relationships with consequences. Then there are the shareholders, the bondholders. And then we have third-party liability. So Toyota will be facing class action suits. I'm a Toyota owner, maybe on those. Nortel faced class action suits. This is not some kind of fuzzy voluntary stuff. This is stuff that can send you to jail. But then we got all this stuff outside in this color. This is the fuzzy, who knows, NGOs, the civil regulators. They have no authority, no legitimacy. They're not elected by anybody, self-appointed. And you got, the equity interveners and the use of beings. So this is all the nature stuff, and that's outside. Companies right now have no accountability to anyone other than this. They can talk a good line, they can do it, but there's no accountability because it doesn't meet the criteria. Now, in government, the little thing here is, why is it that we got a problem? Why is it, we heard this morning from the gal from Hazel, that in climate change, the scarce commodity is time. Well, why is that? Well, yeah, we're running out of time. It's time, not money. And this is where we get the problem, because we identify Rachel Carson. I'm old enough to remember Rachel, Silent Spring, all that stuff that see around us. She identified these risks. I was recently on the Environment Canada website doing some research for this conference. 30, 40 years later, stuff that she identified then, it's still not worked its way into the regulatory regime in SEPA. So there's this lag time. So you start with these big risks, then we get the multilateral agreements, which are what it's not what's right, it's what's negotiated. Then these get translated into new law, domestic legislation, and then finally there's the sharp end of the stick, which is somebody enforcing it. Long time. So basically, the fact that corporations are only accountable for the law, that means we got a problem as a species. Now, let's look at federal accountability. In the government, we have a constitution, thank the Lord. It works, it's got a few quirks, but it works okay. And the federal government has a jurisdiction. The provinces, it's a shared jurisdiction in the environment, which makes it a bit murky, but it's not all that murky. The federal government has a jurisdiction in areas, so for example, in oceans, high seas, there's nobody else out there. 12 miles out, they got the sole jurisdiction. You can hold them to account for the Canadians' oceans, the high seas. It's nobody else. The Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, she or he has responsibility under Section 36. That's a federal jurisdiction. It gets delegated down to the provinces, and they can enforce it in these fancy arrangements. The thing about accountability, authority can be delegated. Accountability is like glue. You can never get rid of it. So the ultimate accountability is with the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. The minister is accountable to Parliament. Yeah, there's a standing committee on fisheries and oceans. There's a standing committee on the environment and sustainable development. They can and will keelhaul the minister. And in the private sector, the currency is money. In the public sector, the currency is embarrassment. Embarrassment. That's what nobody wants. That's what makes the system go. Now you've got committees that can and will hold people to account. And they do, it's a bit of a game. There's political stuff. We see the whole thing going on in Afghanistan, but that's the nature of democracy. It works. And the minister has to render an account. And so the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, they've got to do it. That's what accountability should be. Now, what you need in federal accountability for nature, and let's just take the SESI thing, which has been going on for a while. This has been a solution looking for a need ever since Paul Martin walked out the door and his career ended. And they've been searching for this meaning. But now their ship has come in with this Federal Development Act. And we heard about this morning. This is a profound development. What the Federal Development Act takes us back to the future in the days of Brian Mulroney and Lucien Bouchard, who in some ways was the best environment minister we ever had, where there was a plan and some targets and there was some coherence. So, for example, what they should be doing on KESE and what they should be doing in their strategies is that the federal government is the largest enterprise in Canada. It's huge. Its environmental footprint is huge, tons of greenhouse gases. What they should be doing is setting smart targets, specific. What are going to be their emissions for 2010, 2011? They could have done that 20 years ago. They could do it today. Set specific targets. They got to be measurable. Well, NRCan's measuring this stuff. There's no rocket science to it. They got the numbers. It's units. It's all been worked out. Accountability's got to be defined. Well, most of it's under Public Works. They're the biggest real estate operation here. And then there's some other departments that have their own vehicles and cars. But it's all defined. And it's got to be results-oriented. Yeah, like what about heating? What about transportation? Real specific, tangible stuff, not this airy-fairy stuff on national trends. Can't do anything about national trends. So that's what the federal government should be doing under this here, and they have never done. So there's ABCs of accounting, of compelling accountability. There's got to be an accountability. Yeah, There's got to be accountability relationship. There's got to be a report with compelling accountability that's going to change behavior. And the reason there's a change of behavior is because there's a consequence. So we see this in the stock market. You know, I'll be checking today. I'm a retired guy. We're going to see what happens, what the market's doing. So Canada came out with the GDP numbers the other day. Yesterday, was it? 5%, a sizzling 5%. Well, my portfolio went up. There's a consequence, eh? These numbers, you know, and we've been struggling in the environment to come up with numbers with compelling consequence. Most of them, nobody cares about. We do them, we throw them out in a vacuum, nobody cares about, there's no consequence, there's no change of behavior, forget about it. And the environmental accounting, this environmental accounting zoo, and it's really exploding right now. I mean, Walmart's getting into it now. And they're going to give some kind of environmental footprint on their products, maybe. Now, what's missing? Quickly. And Valerie's going to talk about this. What's wrong with corporate accountability reporting is you got this little wee entity that's surrounded by context, and we get no information on that. Corporations don't tell us what of the 100 most sensitive ecosystems in the world, which ones are they economically dependent on? Which ones are they damaging? What is their environmental effect? All this stuff, we get some little thing, the corporation reporting with absolutely no context, as if they were the only corporation in the universe. Really, it's like somebody telling you your temperature and you don't know what healthy is. Just don't know. It's no context. But then you go to the other extreme, and you go to the government. So the SESI thing, they've come up with measures ever since Paul Martin meant of national trends of greenhouse gases. Well, so they're going up. Who do you blame? You don't know, because they haven't they're starting to disaggregate it out, but many times they've not. They don't focus on the things which are solely in the federal jurisdiction, because that's all they got control over. So what we have at the federal level, we've got all this stuff here, but there's nothing in the middle. You don't know what the federal government's role is in this. They give you all the context, state of the environment, but they don't disaggregate it out to these simple accountabilities at the federal level, the provincial level, and the municipal level. So take-home message is, without accountability, don't bother doing the reporting, because it's just not going to go anywhere. It's like the sound in the forest with no humans to hear it. Thanks a lot.